to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Petoskeys. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, welcome back to the show. I can actually say that since we were off a bit last week.
Yeah, my fault.
Arif had to adult.
Yeah, I had to adult. I got sick on the flight back from Seattle. I had to rebuild this computer. It was awful, man. I had an awful week.
Did you ever end up getting the power cord for it?
Wait, for
the computer
for my laptop?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So yes, but then also I left it at the Viking stadium. So I don't usually make like the exact same catastrophic error 2 weeks in a row. That I can't recall the last time I've done that. I'm not like particularly good at keeping track of stuff. Like I've lost my wallet in the past a couple of times, but I'm not like horrendously bad at it. But like this month I've just been awful. Left the keys to my apartment in some Airbnb, had to pay a fine after we moved out. I left this laptop twice, left the phone charger at the Seattle stadium, which I got that back too. I've just been losing stuff, man. And it's not because we're moving. It's like stuff that I always have on me. Man, rough month for keeping track of stuff for Arif.
Yeah, you're not used to making the same catastrophic mistake twice in a row, Mr. Arif Xavier Rhodes Hassan.
I knew what direction you were going with that as soon as you said it.
Yeah, well,
which maybe that speaks volumes too.
It might. I mean, it also built character for us to walk after the taping of the last show, the block and a half over to the mystifyingly closed 7-Eleven.
I didn't know they closed.
Of all places to close, downtown Seattle. The 7-Eleven closed, so I couldn't get you a charger. So we literally Ubered it because I was so exhausted.
Plus, the Uber in Seattle is crazy cheap. I'm shocked.
Agreed.
Like every ride was under $10. It was not New York at all.
No, this is accurate. Taking God, it must have been like 1:30 in the morning, 2:00 in the morning. Taking an Uber over to 7-Eleven to get you a phone charger. And then me taking another Uber over to my Airbnb so I could sleep for an hour and a half before I needed to be at the airport for my flight. That was fun.
Good times.
Apologies for sounding so exhausted last episode. Somebody actually asked what was with our chemistry for the beginning of the show. For like the first half hour of the show, you and I sounded like we wanted to be anywhere else, which might have been accurate because I was so exhausted after the game. Eric, my buddy who was driving us around a bit that weekend, I don't know if he couldn't remember where his car was or if it was in a complicated place to walk, but we had to walk through some real sketch on the way over to his car.
Oh boy!
Down some roads that really would have been nice if they would have had like a street light. Like you could, you saw the people sleeping and everything, but it was just like we are in particularly, and it was a neighborhood that I was warned was particularly stabby after 10. So like,
that's right.
It's like of all things, this is too much. But thanks again to everybody who listened to the show. Apologies as I was a little tired, but I've been told that this is not the first time that I've podcasted in my sleep. My wife had recently told me after I had mentioned, I was so exhausted that I was basically going off of like muscle memory to start the show last episode. It's like, oh yeah, sometimes when you're sleeping, you just pop out, you just go into the intro to your show. Like
you're kidding.
I that's what I've been told. I have been told that I will go into it. And here's the best part. After I complete the other end of the tin cannon string, here's Useful Human Arif Hassan. Apparently there's a conversation involved. I have no idea what it is, but I start laughing.
Presume what I say?
Yeah, but I start laughing. So I apparently have been podcasting in my sleep. I don't know how to feel about this, but I think it means I need to change up the opening a bit at the end of this season, maybe. we'll see. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Welcome back to the show. We will be talking about the season sweep over the Lions. Not the most exciting game that has ever been played in the National Football League, or at least, last week. But it was a victory for the Vikings, and this definitely helps the playoff picture a little bit. So we'll be talking about that in just a moment. But before we do, just want to thank you guys so much. Special thanks to everyone who came out to the show out in Seattle. Everyone who hung out with us before and after the game. That was really cool. Thank you guys so much. That was a hell of a time. That was the live show. Really, really was awesome. Check out Petoskeys if you are in the area. Totally worth months of me promoting them. They more than lived up to the hype. That was a really cool show. If you enjoy the show and would like to help us keep the lights on, maybe help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, maybe even help with next year's live show or ideas for next year's live show, you can do so at patreon.com/NorseCode, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well if you hear value in what we produce. We do have 2 new donors to mention, and we have a special note afterwards. We have 2 people who snuck in at the very end before the deadline, so you will be getting the swag. Ben via Patreon for Tree Fitty. Thank you so much, Ben. And Christopher Murphy, who decided to outdo everybody from the promotion and do 430? 430? I'm going to go with 430 on that. I was trying to figure out a way to make that sound Loch Ness Monster-y, but here we are. So thank you, Christopher, so much. Also, if you listen to the live show, and based on the numbers from our podcast distributor, a lot of you did, you may have remembered a moment of the show when they proceeded to give us a free pitcher of hams. Well, apparently the gentleman who sent that in wrote us in and said, "You'll have to forgive the beer selection. There was a dedicated bar in Seattle until a couple of years ago, and they served Greenbelt Premium, and getting you to a couple of those was my intention when I called, but hey, reliving the glory days every once in a while won't hurt." We may have oversold the awfulness of it, but, enough of it was drank where it was at least
You can't really complain. We had it. We had a lot of it.
I don't know. I don't remember what led to it, but apparently I was drinking from the pitcher to prove a point to somebody. I think it was a point to Eric that I was still, in fact, drinking it. Not to say that I was drunk or blacked out. I was neither, but I was drinking hams from a pitcher, and I don't remember why, so I think the hams might have had something to do with it. Anyway, from Winchell, I really appreciate the podcast. Keep up the good work. My question, and since he gave us a pitcher of beer, I think we can open up the question with him. My question, with all the attention the leaky secondary is getting, seems to me like the real concern for our playoff aspirations is the interior defensive line. How bad are we in the middle, quantitatively and qualitatively?
So I would argue not as bad as it seems, if only because there's quality at nose tackle. So really we're talking about 3 techniques. So Linval Joseph had a really good game against the Lions. I expect that to more continue than not. He had a rough game against Seattle. So his knee surgery typically takes 6 weeks to recover. The Seattle game occurred 3 weeks after the surgery, but he didn't have any swelling, so they figured he'd be able to play. And he didn't play all that well. So him coming back and playing at a pretty high level, that's really nice to see. And I would expect him to kind of continue that. So beyond that, you have to take a look at 3 technique. Armin Watts is a nose tackle, so his kind of excellent play doesn't really translate as much there. Shamar Stafford is pretty bad as a 3 technique. He's more of a backup hybrid nose tackle. The same is seemingly true for Jaleel Johnson. And they have been choosing to keep Hercules Mataafa and Jalen Holmes inactive, which probably tells us that they're not super impressed with the job they've been doing. And part of that is because, Armin Watts has been playing well enough that they want to keep him active. So they've been putting like a Fadio Denebo, who's played a little bit of 3 technique in his career, over there and not just on nickel downs. It's not great, but it's also not as important a position as like the cornerback group, which is why I think I talk about it a lot more. It's also kind of more obvious when they make mistakes. So, it's easier to talk about too. So it's kind of that combination. But I don't know that that's going to be the thing that like crushes the Vikings or anything like that. I think if the Vikings have problems in the playoffs defensively, I think it'll be kind of that secondary group, or, an uncharacteristically bad performance, but somebody's been playing well this year. Think Harrison Smith against the Eagles. He was having a really remarkable year, had that bad play. If, like Kendricks, for whatever reason has a really remarkably bad game, I could see that being kind of the reason. But I don't think it's the 3 technique position. That's just not as important a position, when you take a look at kind of what leads to team wins and what leads to, better expected points and all that. So there's that, but they're the lowest pressure rate, I think, of any team from the 3 technique position in the NFL. And that sucks a lot. They're all right at stopping the run from the 3 technique position, which matters about 3 times less, but is still, kind of something. But yeah, it's a hole, but I wouldn't say it's a problem.
So before we get into the Lions game and talking about your adopted alma mater, is there anything we need to wrap up from the week in Seattle? We talked a little bit about the favorite food and all that. Is there anything that what's your best memory of the week in Seattle?
Man, there's a lot of good stuff. Most of the time when I travel, the best memories are like food. And I probably have to go with that again. I went to a place called the Skillet Diner, which has really good brunch. They have this item on the menu that is that's like, I wouldn't say it's their signature, but it's kind of unique to them. I forgot what it was called, but it was egg with like a custard underneath it and all that. That wasn't good. I just didn't like the sweetness with the egg. But everything else, and I actually ordered something else because I was just like, I can't walk away from this meal.
This can't just be the thing that I take away from this.
Yeah. And everything else I ordered was just phenomenal. So that just might be a taste profile I don't love. Biscuit Bitch was incredible. We talked about that in the recap show.
Yes.
But that was really good.
Really was fantastic. And when you go to a place like that, you expect to hear profanity at least 12 to 16 times while you're getting your food, and they did not disappoint in the location.
It turns out that's an underestimate. Yeah. No, I loved it. So those are probably my favorite memories. I did attend a football game that was not so great.
We did get a question, and we can just kind of go into that here. How was CenturyLink as far as like going in for press and the spread? Because people always ask about the free food that they give to you guys.
So the weird thing about CenturyLink to me is that there's not a huge segregation between the press and the fans when it comes to like entering and stuff like that. Which, it's not like something I complain about. Like it's not like, hey, keep us separate. We're not like the rabble or whatever. But
Nonsense.
It's just very weird.
That's all you complained about in riding with Eric on the way back. We didn't have separate exits. I was still, there's still drunks
that is a complaint, because when I walk in, I have no idea where to go because I'm just in the concourse, and there's not like that's a legitimate complaint. I'm just lost.
How do you not know your way up to the press box at CenturyLink?
Oh my god. It's not my home state. Anyway, I walk in. I have no idea how to get to the press area. There's nothing. So there's a press entrance because that's the only way you can bring your bag that has the laptop that you're working within. And then I walk in and it's just the same as every other entrance. And, I have no idea where to go because now I'm in the concourse of the stadium and there's like people are selling stuff and people are like walking to their seats and there's not like an indication of where to go. Most press entrances bring you to a press elevator, and then you can go to the press box. It's not because I want special treatment or anything like that. We actually share that with all the suites and stuff like that. It's because I just want to know where to go. I'm not going to just take a random seat, which, I would have to not only pay for, but would also suck and I wouldn't be able to work. I need to know where to go, and I had no idea where to go. I figure out where the press stuff is. I go there eventually. And there's not like an indication of how to get to the press box from there. I mean, there's someone there and I could have asked them and maybe that's just on me. But I walk in, I walk to where it seems like a lot of media are going and I just end up on the field, which technically I didn't get a credential for the field. So that was weird. I'm like, I'm not supposed to be there. And I'm like, okay, cool. Glad someone was checking on that. They checked my press credential to get into the area. I'm not saying you can just walk in, but I just like ended up on the field. And then I figured it out. I ended up asking the person I should have just asked at the beginning anyway, and go up to the elevator. And the food was like not great compared to other press food. The Jets is still the worst press food I've ever had.
I was going to say, wasn't that like pigs in a blanket and like a big bucket of sad?
Yeah, it was gas station croissant sandwiches.
That's just what it was.
These cold turkey croissant sandwiches that came like in the prepackaged wrapping. And I don't like to complain about like free food or anything like that. But I couldn't eat that. So, I was just hungry. I was like, I can't eat this. It's awful. There's nothing to eat. And so the fact that the Seattle food was not great doesn't really bother me that much. I'm like impressed with really good food. The Vikings were generally like above average. Not always great, but generally above average. And so, I'm satisfied, and really good food is just a huge bonus. But here it was like not that great, but the thing that helps is they have a relationship with Starbucks, like what corporate entity in Seattle doesn't, but they've got a relationship with Starbucks. So if you just got a free Starbucks bar, and so any mediocrity by the food was massively outweighed by the fact that I could just order like a white mocha with an extra shot and not pay for it.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And because I consume tons of caffeine and therefore have an insanely high tolerance of it, I could just go back again and again and again. And I really enjoyed that part.
Well, that is something that is quite important, quite frankly, is to make sure that you were caffeinated. It also explains why you were in much more awake for the last episode than I was.
Well, yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
I was cooked quite thoroughly. All right, let's get into the show, and let's get into our main discussion, which is the victory over the Detroit Lions. The Lions looked, well, Blough couldn't do a thing is the main takeaway, and the Vikings did enough to be able to put them away. I feel like that's the story, and that the Vikings didn't shoot themselves in the foot enough in order to cause them to lose the game.
Yeah, and I think so. I wrote my takeaways from the game, and a lot of the comments in that piece were just like, "There's no takeaways. You can't get anything from a team as bad as the Lions." Which I feel like they didn't like read the piece, because like not only do I take that into account, a lot of it is like not even relevant to the fact that they played the Lions. Like the fact that Cousins had like a pretty interesting discussion about a statistic that clearly has nothing to do with whether or not the Lions are good or bad. It was just like, yeah, he's got a 70% completion rate. Is that meaningful? Not really. So it was kind of interesting. But there are, I think, takeaways from the game about the performance the Vikings had that I think translate. So, for example, I thought live in the stadium, and then watching the broadcast a little bit afterwards, and it says the coach's film is out as of an hour before this recording. It wasn't actually out, but based off of what I saw, the defensive backs played really well, and that is a good receiving core. Like no matter how bad the Lions generally have performed this year, no matter how poorly David Blough plays, which again he was actually kind of impressive on the Thanksgiving game, so I want to give him credit for that. He's a third string undrafted quarterback. So, if they play well against him, whatever. It doesn't matter. The fact that the receivers didn't get a ton of yards, not that important, because the quarterback throwing them the ball, was just kind of not fit for that situation. The fact that the defensive backs were able to stay in tight coverage for a lot of that game, whether it was Xavier Rhodes when he was still healthy, and he did lose a guy on that interception that Harrison Smith picked off right before he got injured. Which I want to be clear, a lot of people, whenever Rhodes gets burned, people, see Rhodes, pull at his hammy and he thinks, they think that that's an excuse. And I don't think that's the case. He gets injured after plays where he doesn't have to make an excuse, and then he leaves, right? Like, and goes to the medical tent. I think that's one of the narratives about Rhodes that like really ticks me off. Like, yeah, he might be playing poorly, might be playing well, whatever. Your opinion on that is like, I think a fair opinion to have based off of, the way you're looking at the game versus the way I'm looking at the game. But to like argue that he just uses injury as an excuse, which I think people are using less and less, but they took that narrative a lot. I don't think that that's fair at all. I think he genuinely gets injured. And in this case, he clearly got injured. before Harrison Smith even hit him. I mean, you could just see his ankle twist. So
that was about as, if you're going to get hurt, you might as well get hurt by Harrison Smith in order to shut people up. Like, oh, no, if you get hit by Harrison Smith, you're going down, whether you're braced for it or not.
So so here, Rhodes lost a guy, but for the most part, he actually played really well. Which actually, honestly, that's kind of my takeaway from this Seattle game. But him losing a guy that results in a pick for the Vikings versus him losing a guy that results in a 60-yard touchdown for Seattle. Two completely different stories, but I think functionally very similar performances otherwise, because I thought he did a pretty good job bullying Decaf Metcalf. But yeah, so I thought that was interesting. Mike Hughes, I think, had a really great game, which, it started really hot and it kind of cooled off, but for the most part was pretty great. Trey Waynes outside of one drive where he allowed 3 receptions and had a penalty on one of the receptions he allowed, I thought played pretty well. Mackenzie Alexander, I thought, was outstanding. I think he's got a poor PFF score. I don't know that I agree with that because I think the receptions he gives up were pretty tough. He got sort of picked from a bunch formation and man coverage to allow like a 9-yard first down on third down, and then there was like a 10-yarder but for the most part, I thought he actually played really phenomenally well. And he's the best performing corner on the roster right now because he hasn't had any really tremendously bad games or anything like that. So I think those are all reasonable takeaways because the worst receiver that they put on the field was Danny Amendola, who obviously is not who he was, but he's still very good. And they were able to do a really good job kind of shutting down that receiver core from the perspective of coverage. So that's useful. I think the fact that they didn't get a ton of pressure, and obviously they ended with 5 sacks, so they made the pressures they did get count, but they didn't get a ton of pressure. I think that is kind of like a ghost concern. Like, it's not a huge concern because I expect them to be able to generate pressure on a regular basis, but they should have done a better job against that offensive line, which to me strikes me as about as like an average offensive line. So even if you account for opponent, there's that. And then the Vikings offense, I think for the most part they played well, but they missed a couple of opportunities. And I think Cousins was a little bit too hesitant in the game. It didn't matter because the Vikings ended up winning, and I think his final statistics look pretty good, but it would have been nice if he'd just been a little bit more aggressive. And in my preview for the game that, we publish, every Saturday, with Chad Graff and John Krasinski, I mentioned that the Vikings don't need to push themselves and be aggressive. Like, my preview for the Seattle game, I said the Vikings absolutely need to be aggressive. That's the only way they can come out winning. In a game where they're clear favorites, I'm okay being a lot more conservative. And I think even with that framework, I would say the Vikings offense was still too conservative. I asked after the game, hey, outside of the 2-minute drill where you had that deep shot to Diggs, it seemed like you played a really conservative offense. Why is that? Was that part of the game plan going in? Was it because of what you saw? And it looks like the Lions just didn't play the coverages that the Vikings were used to seeing from the Lions, either from their last meeting or from the film that they had watched of the past couple of games. They played a bunch of different coverages. They played split safety, single high safety. They played man zone, everything. Cousins listed them all off and they played all of them. And so because there's a little bit of confusion with regards to how the pre-snap read versus the post-snap look ended up playing out, they ended up dumping the ball off a lot. And I would have liked to see them play a little bit more aggressively because I thought there were some missed opportunities, especially for Diggs. So that's kind of the issue I had with the offense, but obviously they just played really well. So, not too many concerns there. But yeah, it's a game where they crushed a team that is playing far below their talent level. I think that's a coaching mistake. I think that it's going to be a similar situation against the Chargers, where you've got a tremendously talented team that can't string together wins. I think that's probably coaching related. It's also like Phillip Rivers has fallen off related. But yeah, and we'll talk about that obviously in the preview episode. But yeah, it's a case where this Lions team, I think, I don't want to call them underrated because I expect them to continue to lose. But I would say underappreciated in terms of the talent that they had. So, yeah, I think a lot of the individual performances translate pretty well. I thought, some of these players played pretty well. Laquan Treadwell, he continues to show up, which is nice to see. BC Johnson, he only had 1 catch. It was a touchdown. It was really impressive, but I thought for the most part, he played pretty well. Yeah, good to see from the Vikings. They did what they were supposed to do. Some elements of that, I think, draw some concerns. Some elements of that, I think you can take a lot of positives from.
Yeah. And let's be clear. This is a Lions team that has just been marred by injury as well. This is a Lions team that is without
and trades.
Oh God. Yeah, this is a team that has not only done damage to itself, but has sent that has, you know, spent a bunch of time in the blue tent. So a lot of this is self-inflicted. Now, Quandary Diggs, that's the name of the fellow who's currently destroying in Seattle right now, that the whole team for the Lions defense was upset that he was traded. Like, this is a team that is self-destructed. Let's be clear. This is not a good team. And this would have been a much worse loss for the Vikings than anything else. But I do want to start off by saying Daniil Hunter may in fact own David Blough.
Yeah, he's going to be in his nightmares, man. I can't.
that jersey's going to Canton. I like that.
There's at least one replay. It might have even been a completion, but there's like one replay. No, it's on the pick, so it was kind of a completion. It didn't hit the ground anyway. But on the Harrison Smith pick, there's a replay where I think it's Daniil Hunter just like nails him like a second after he lets go of the ball, and it's in slow-mo, so it seems like it's 3 seconds. But like the way his face contorts is both, you know, the normal reaction to someone absolutely decking you, just like pain, but like also it felt like, and maybe I'm just projecting onto him and maybe that's unfair, but it really feels like his face also had a, what am I doing here? Kind of like,
one of those, you may wonder how I got myself into this position.
Yeah, it's like the freeze frame. Yeah.
Daniil Hunter, smash. Oh no. And it was an interception. And it's not like he was an incompetent quarterback. Far from it. He had a couple of nice throws, a couple of halfway decent plays, but the Vikings defense was not giving him any time to really do anything. And that first series really solidified that. I think it was 2 tips and a drop. Like it was rough. Yeah, this was a defense that was not going to let the Lions take any more time than they could.
Yeah, it was good to see that from the defense. And it's actually one of the reasons the defense is back was not my takeaway, was because it's difficult to evaluate in that context. Blough has had one kind of impressive game, hot start, good finish, kind of middle of the Thanksgiving game. And he's had this game against the Vikings. So it's difficult to figure out who he is, but I think our presumption is that he's not a particularly good quarterback, and I think that's a fair presumption. But yeah, I didn't want to say, hey, the defense was dominant, which was a phrase that Cousins used a lot in the post-game pressure, that the defense was dominant. But it was really good to see because, you know, the alternative is that, hey, it sucks, right? One framework to look at a game like this is, what does a good defense look like against this kind of offensive setup for the Lions? What does an above average defense look like? What does an average defense look like? What does a below average defense look like? What do those look like? And I would say they look like what a good defense would look like against the Lions. So that to me, I mean, they allowed 1 score, right, on 1 drive. So that to me, I think says, you know, some good things about the Vikings. It's not an indication that they're back. It's not proof that they're good, but I think we can argue, hey, you know, there's a good chance that the Vikings defense may have turned some things around since the bye, because I thought they did. I know they gave up 37 points, but I thought they did better against Seattle than that kind of point total indicates. So there's that. They also, you know, kept Bo Scarborough to below, you know, he's averaging 5 yards an attempt, for the Lions. They kept him below 4. His expected point total, which is a more true indication of running, production, was the worst he's had this year. You know, it's pretty awful. So, really good to see that from the defense. But yeah, you know, the defense forced a bunch of 3 and outs. Some of that was self-induced. They should not be running the ball 3 times, coming out of a half where you're down 20-0. So that was, an issue, but for the most part, you know, I thought they played pretty well. You know, Blough had his moments. The areas where he doesn't seem to be as hot, you know, I think under pressure, he doesn't make decisions quickly enough. The Vikings were able to exploit that because they were able to turn their very few pressures, into sacks. And I think part of the reason they didn't have a ton of pressures, I think a lot of that just has to do with the fact that the Lions did a very anti-Lions move, and they turned to a very short passing game. Under Stafford, they were a very deep passing offense. With Jeff Driscoll, very deep passing offense. With David Blough, they just can't do that, so they don't. And so it's a quick strike game, so there's not a ton of pressure kind of just to be had. But the Vikings kind of made the most of it when the Lions were forced into a situation where they couldn't just play a quick game. So, yeah. Good performance by the defense. Don't want to take too much away from it, but I don't want to put too much emphasis on it either.
Well, the other thing that was really noticeable to me watching the game was the fact that Xavier Rhodes was not out there to start.
Yeah. Well, no, he started the first drive, but he wasn't there for the second drive, or I believe the third drive. It was part of this interesting cornerback rotation. I wrote about that a little bit. I don't know if I got across everything I wanted to get across. Part of the problem with leaving my charger at the stadium was that I lost all the work I wrote at the stadium, so I had to rewrite it at like 2 a.m. Just a bad week for me. But I think that's kind of fascinating. So they had Mike Hughes play in place of Rhodes and then also in place of Waynes before Rhodes got injured, and so Mike Hughes played a lot more, and then Mike Hughes gets injured, so you have Holton Hill, who, played capably. But the plan going in, and Zimmer confirms this after the game, was that this was meant to be a cornerback rotation. And I think it's interesting. Rhodes had one of his better games since week 8. I was kind of defending Rhodes' play up until, week 8, and then week 8 on, I think, his play has actually kind of matched the criticisms a little bit more, so that's a problem. And since then, I would argue that he hasn't played well, and this is kind of the first game where you could say maybe he did. So that was nice to see. And maybe the rotation kind of plays a role in that. He stays fresh, he's less likely to get injured, although again that still happened. I don't know. I find it interesting. It's also a good way to kind of ease Hughes into the role. The Vikings do have pretty tremendous depth, even if everyone is kind of upset about the quality of play, and fairly so, but the quality of play from the starters. There is a lot there with Mike Hughes, and J-Ron Curse is a slot corner sometimes, and Holton Hill has played capably. But the rotation is going to be interesting. I think the fact that they're kind of becoming more familiar with what the defense is asking them to do and can kind of improve their on-field communication, and so forth, as with different combinations of defensive backs out there, it gives them opportunities to win in matchup situations, what the Vikings tried a couple weeks ago with Mike Hughes against Dallas, which didn't work out, obviously. But I think, and obviously Trey Waynes was injured. It wasn't like they played Mike Hughes; they started him for the matchup. But I would have liked to see a better game there. But he played really well here, and if, in the playoffs, there's a matchup where you say, hey, Mike Hughes is kind of a better fit here. Xavier Rhodes is kind of a better fit here. Trey Waynes is kind of a better fit here. Which, it fits kind of the prototypes of receivers you're likely to see. Rhodes, you want to put him on physical receivers. That didn't super work out against Cortland Sutton, but, that was the plan. Waynes, you probably want to put on deep threats like Darius Slayton or Deshaun Jackson, who I don't think can come back from IR at this point, but, a deep threat. And then, Mike Hughes, you want to put on quicker receivers. And so you've got kind of a cornerback for every matchup, which is kind of nice. And the fact that they play more, in different rotations, I think that's kind of fascinating and kind of leads to some opportunities for the Vikings. Also, maybe an indication that Rose's time in Minnesota, is coming to a close.
Which is something that a lot of people are talking about, not necessarily within the organization, but a lot of fans are beginning to clamor for a parting of ways. But we can talk about Linval Joseph having... I thought Linval had a much better game this game than he did in Seattle. It looked like Linval was doing fairly well, despite the fact that, especially for that one drive, it seemed like every call in the universe was happening to the Vikings at one time. It was like holding, hands to the face, just everything was happening on the one drive in order to conspire for Matt Prater to get in range and then miss a kick. Which everyone is thankful for, by the way, for you writing that article.
Yeah, right. Since then, it's interesting because that article was like over it was like 2015, I think. Like it's a couple of years of data, and randomness is what randomness is, right? And then They start missing kicks.
Something about causation and correlation, something along the line. It's entirely possible you're just Q from Star Trek at this point.
I have the same attitude. I don't know if I have quite the same level of power.
That is a personality that just screams that needs to be on Twitter. But John Delancey going into sports Twitter would be fantastic. But
it'd be phenomenal.
All the penalties. Wow.
So I was gonna write another take. So I had 4 takeaways. I was gonna write a 5th one about penalties. But the thing that's kind of weird to me is the Vikings actually, they're like league average in terms of penalties. The reason it seems like so much is because they're traditionally a team that doesn't get very many penalties at all. I think in 2017, they were second best in terms of penalty rate, which is the second fewest penalties. And so, in 2018, they got a couple more, but it wasn't, nearly as bad. And so this year they've gotten a lot more penalties. And I went to NFLpenalties.com. I looked it up and I tried to slice and dice the data a bunch of different ways to see why it felt like they were getting a bunch more penalties. And it's just because they were getting more, but everyone's getting more. And so the penalties are up this year, right? So, it's an issue, right? Because they got, like you said, every kind of penalty. The whole team false started. There was a holding penalty on a run. There was defensive holding. There was, which I think there was 2 defensive holdings. One on Waynes that was declined. One on Harrison Smith that resulted in a first down. I don't know. I don't think there was a pass interference. It's kind of the only part of the cycle they didn't hit for, if I remember correctly. But they got, like you said, basically every other kind of penalty. Block in the illegal blindside block or block in the back.
We talk about momentum every once in a while on this show and how your belief in that it doesn't exist, and
sort of doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist. That's right. It seems like you'll get the occasional penalty, but you will get stacks of 3, 4, 5 in one drive for this team. And it's like once or twice a game, you will just see this laundry list. And then everything will be fine for most of the game, except for, that one drive. We're like, God, that's how they were able to progress and get 3 points. Or in this case, a miss was just the 5 or 6 penalties in a row.
Yeah. And so that's, I don't know if that's going to be part of my argument, because it's still the same argument about momentum that people who dislike momentum will say, well, you remember the drives that were extended by penalties that turned into points, and it's easy to forget the drives that, so I don't know if that's the case. Obviously I remember the Chase Daniel drive where he comes in, that was originally a 3-and-out with Mitch Trubisky. Penalty extends the drive. Trubisky gets to, I want to say the 30 or so, the Vikings 30 or so, gets injured. I think there was another penalty, and then Chase Daniel drives for a touchdown or whatever, right? It's easy to remember that, but there's probably a ton of plays where the Vikings committed defensive penalty, and it turns out fine that we just kind of don't remember. So that might be part of it, but it really did feel like, they were kind of shooting themselves in the foot for a little bit. Again, the Lions only scored once, so we're kind of picking nits at this point, but it felt like coming off the Seattle game where they had 1 penalty, I want to say, very few penalties, certainly, into this game where it felt like a return to all the penalties that, I thought we'd gotten this out of our system. Because if you play a penalty-free game, if you're a team that can play penalty-free games, that's a tremendous advantage. That's 60 free yards, kind of just waiting for the other team. And they usually occur on critical downs, and they generate first downs. So the worst part about penalties is not necessarily the yardage, but that so many of them create first downs. And sometimes even without the yardage, right? Which I hate automatic first down penalties. It sucks. I hate them. It sucks. It's such a disproportionate punishment. But yeah, whatever. It does so much for an offensive drive when you commit defensive penalties that it just feels like a killer. And it felt like a return to that. Now again, so this crew, penalizes more than any other crew in the NFL, or has done so at least this year. The Vikings get more penalties under this crew, because generally speaking, over the course of the past couple of years, Rhodes in particular, who got 1 penalty, no penalties. I don't know. Rhodes in particular has been penalized by this crew a lot. So it felt like, they're kind of setting up for a pretty heavily penalized game, and that's ended up being what happened. But yeah, a lot of it was like a lot of, I would say, probably borderline calls that you can't substantially argue are incorrect calls, but are all kind of ticky-tacky, and if they didn't call them, you probably wouldn't complain too much either. The Stephen Weatherly one really bothers me because that is definitely a penalty by rule, but like, who cares? Like, yeah, he kind of hits him on the face a little bit, roughing the passer. Get out of here, dude. Like, so there's that. So, like, I don't know if there's an indication here that the Vikings continue to be undisciplined or whatever, but yeah, I couldn't make that a takeaway because everyone's getting penalized, so it's not really a substantial disadvantage for the Vikings at the moment.
It just piled on as annoying as that was. But enough about the defense. Let's talk about the offense a little bit. And Kirk Cousins and Diggs were able to hook up a couple of times. Our man CJ Ham was able to continue his Yak King crusade.
Ham-yak.
Yeah, he truly is a fine. What I enjoyed was the discussion. Like, he knows he's not going to get very much of this, so he's got to make a shot here. He's got to make everything count. If they actually do have a real fullback position, he belongs he belongs going to the Pro Bowl, right? For fullback. I don't think anybody in the league is doing more at the fullback position than he is.
It'd be difficult to beat out Kyle Juszczyk from San Francisco. That's about it, though. You can't argue that, like, I think Patrick DeMarco is the fullback for the Falcons. You can't argue that he's playing better. You can't argue that any other fullback in the NFC North is playing very well, because they're not. Chicago doesn't even have one, so. But, was it Bodden for the Packers, or Vital for the Packers, Bodden for the Lions? Neither of them are playing very well, and the contrast between them and Ham, who is doing so much. He's not even that great of a blocker, but he's doing so much on so few opportunities. I mean, very easy to sympathize with the CJ Ham vote for the Pro Bowl.
We got to send Ham to the Pro Bowl. That's the next step in all of this. So
what's interesting is that there's only one like interesting fullback in the AFC. It's probably Anthony Sherman, and he's a pure blocker, so he doesn't get any love anyway, and he's gotten way fewer snaps this year. So it's even conceivable that CJ Ham misses the Pro Bowl for Kyle Juszczyk to make it for the NFC, but makes the All-Pro team. Like, it's totally possible.
Jeez. It's he's this year's Harrison Smith, right?
He's too good.
He's too good. He's too good for the Pro Bowl. That's awful. Hey, I just want to let you know the Eagles for the first time got a first down for like the first time in I think 6 drives. That wasn't penalty related. Good for them. We're recording this instead of watching this atrocious game. I just turned it on for a couple of seconds. Went, yep, that's some ugliness right there. Good
my mistake.
Yeah, my bad. I admit it. But as you had said, this was a bit more of a cautious display. It really felt like this was a team that, on offense anyway, was able to accomplish what they wanted to at the end of the first half, and then just kind of coasted or didn't make it as much of a priority to be aggressive in the second half. Was this something?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, was this something that was kind of by design by Zimmer, or was this something that they felt that it was more the defense causing them trouble in the second half?
I think it was more the defense causing them trouble in the second half. Again, when I asked Cousins like what the issue was, yeah, they did enter the game with a more conservative game plan, which again, something I agree with. But in the second half, they weren't able to convert third downs. And Cousins said something interesting too, is that obviously they were going to play a run heavy game in general because that's who they are. But also, they've got, a 2-score lead, so they're going to run the ball a lot more. But when that happens, you have to be prepared to be able to convert on third and long, because sometimes runs don't go very far. And so he said, hey, if you run the ball a lot, you have to be able to convert third and long, which I thought was pretty telling. It probably tells us that running the ball is not that efficient, but fine. You have to convert third and long, and they weren't able to do that. And, every team's game plan on 3rd and 7 is to convert, right? There's not a conservative game plan there. There's an aggressive one, where it's to convert and then get like 40 more yards on top of it. But for the most part, your goal remains the same across teams. And the Vikings weren't able to do that. So it wasn't just because of a conservative game plan. They were kind of forced into, by Cousins' eyes anyway, to check down because, he wasn't able to, either find a play that beat that defense, by an audible or something like that, or identify the defense quickly enough so he'd kind of just go to the most open guy, which was a check down or whatever, right? He wasn't able to figure out kind of what was happening in enough time to be able to exploit it. So a lot of that ended up being check downs, which, that kind of sucks because, again, he's doing all my analysis for me this week. He made a really good point. The whole point of double dipping, the reason that you defer when you win is to score twice. Like, it doesn't really matter if you don't score, right? Possessions for scoring. And so it was nice to be able to score at the end of the half, which I tweeted out that, like, Diggs' 44-yard touchdown, only like 2 people corrected me because he didn't score a touchdown. It was Dalvin Cook just one play later. And that tells me how disinterested people were in this game that, I tweeted something just blatantly incorrect.
Well, people are much more interested in the higher scoring game that was happening on a
the 49ers Saints game was incredible.
On a stream that may or may not have been legal for them to be watching. They were all
right.
They were all watching that on their devices and not being on Twitter, which is probably best for them, really.
Yeah, it's probably, everyone should probably engage in a little more of that. But so scoring at the end of the half, really nice, but it doesn't mean a ton in terms of the strategy of double dipping. Again, I don't think it's that as important as coaches make it out to be. I'd rather just have the ball first. But the point is that you score twice, and they weren't able to do that. So they were genuinely the highest priority on that first drive coming out of the half was to score, to make the tempo really difficult for the Lions to catch up. And they couldn't do that. And then the second drive, they couldn't score either. I don't think it was just a product of being conservative. I think there were some things in that Lions defense that kind of pushed them in other directions. And I think primarily because, they had crafted a game plan that was kind of meant to beat the most common looks the Lions would show. And they did a bunch of stuff that they typically haven't done a ton. So I think that, in particular is what prevented the Vikings from, putting up more points on the board.
What was nice to watch was Diggs just own Darius Slay up and down the field. That was fun to watch, and they showed respect to each other on Twitter and everything. But this was a game where Diggs just kind of sat there and went, "You have to understand, I am so much better than you."
Yeah, right. Yeah, he demolished him, and that first half was like wild. He had like 84 yards on 20 dropbacks, and he wasn't even on the field for every one of those snaps. Just a crazy good first half. And not a ton after that. Again, conservative game plan coming out of the second half, or conservative play coming out of the second half. But sometimes I just I just watch one matchup because that's the one I'm kind of most interested in either writing about or kind of seeing what's happening. And just watching Diggs on Slay, even on plays where he wasn't targeted, I mean, he was just crushing this dude. Slay's had kind of a down year, a lot like Rhodes. Both coming off of 2 years prior, they were Pro Bowl cornerbacks and all that. Diggs really worked him. Really great level of play from Diggs.
So Cook had a decent game, but Cook's not the running back that we're talking about today with his leaping ability. Mattison, however, that was some impressive play.
Yeah, he got the hurdle.
the full hurdle. What was fun was I was having to drive, so I missed the viewing of it the first time. So I had to listen to Paul Allen just scream about how he jumped 16 feet over the head of the defender, and how you better be watching SportsCenter tonight, folks, because that play better be on there. That was an impressive. That was an impressive move.
It was. The thing that gets me the most is that most of the time when you see a ball carrier hurdle somebody, that's it. The amount of yardage they gain stops at the hurdle, which is fine because if they didn't hurdle, they'd get even less yardage. But where they land is usually how many yards they get. And I think every time Mattison has hurdled somebody, which I think has been 3 times this year, he has gained yardage. He even got a touchdown, one of them, but he has gained yardage. And he was a hurdler in high school, but a lot of these guys have, pretty athletic backgrounds and they can't seem to advance the ball past a hurdle. So he seems to deploy it judiciously enough where he doesn't get decked in the air when he does decide to hurdle, and he lands really well. And so he gets it. I don't know. It's not that big a deal, but I couldn't stop talking about it to Sam Ekstrom, who sat next to me in the press box. Because like it doesn't happen. People don't get additional yards or substantial additional yards off of a hurdle. So that's kind of cool.
Or
another example of him being able to do that.
Or the worst case scenario, they turn into the Rosencopter. And that just...
Right, yeah. It can go real bad. You can turn into a GIF real fast.
You, sir, can live the rest of your career out on Twitter. That is what will happen there. You'll just you spinning will just exist from here on out. Is there anything else we need to say to wrap up the game? This wasn't a game where Cousins was particularly bad or particularly good. He was efficient. There was nothing in the way of real turnovers from him. And it's not like the defense was beating up the line either. Right.
The Cousins did throw a near pick on a broken play where it looked like he wanted to hop one over to Rudolph, but they got his arm as he was throwing, so it looked like it was a nearly pick six. That was a Garrett Bradbury reception. That was probably the only mistake that he really made aside from, missed opportunities, which we already talked about a little bit. I would say, from a special teams perspective, Colquitt was really poor at punting, which didn't help very much. And I think that's part of the reason the Vikings went for it on fourth down late in the game. I know a lot of people disagreed with that call, but I think if your punter's not, for whatever reason, able to get it inside the 20, which, he had a lot of trouble getting it inside the 10 and a lot of trouble even keeping it inside the 20 on a lot of these punts, then there's no reason to punt at all because it's like 15 yards of field position. You go for it on fourth down, 4th and 1, you convert it, you just win the game. Versus punting, they have the ball, and possession is more important than 15 yards. Like the 100% chance of losing possession on a punt versus the 40-odd% chance of losing possession on 4th and 1. The Vikings are very good at converting 4th and short this year, or 3rd and short this year. The difference there is maybe a 40% chance, and that the ability to retain the ball is an absolute game winner, whereas the ability to lose the ball puts them in like 2-score range. So I thought it was the right decision. A lot of people are like, why the hell would you punt it there? Or why the hell wouldn't you punt it there? But the Vikings were not punting well. Colquitt, it would just had a difficult day, especially in terms of directional punting. And so I am kind of surprised to see a lot of people really didn't like that fourth down call to go for it. I thought it was really smart play from Zimmer. So, that's the only other thing I wanted to add. I guess Dan Bailey got all his kicks, right?
Dan Bailey looked fantastic. Good for Dan Bailey. The fact that we don't have to recap the kicker, and his misses this year has been nice. It's been a nice change.
To Britton Colquitt, the best holder in the league.
Exactly. All right, so enough about the Lions game. Let's talk about the real reason why people are tuning into this podcast, and that is for you to discuss your James Mattison Dukes.
My Dukes!
They're back.
They mounted a comeback against Monmouth, who put up a fight in the first quarter. 2 huge plays. I believe there was a 93-yarder in there that they gave up. And then the Dukes they clamped down. The 93 yards ended up being the total amount of rushing yards that the Monmouth, I don't know, what are they, Warhawks? That sounds about right. The Monmouth Birds of Prey, were able to put together, a really incredible performance from the quarterback, whose name is not easy to pronounce.
You've been watching them all year. Watching them all year.
Lifelong fan. 22-25. I'm sure he had over 300 yards.
Liked him out of high school, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great get. They've had really phenomenal performances in the running game. The running back's name also super difficult to pronounce. Not going to try it.
You couldn't even pick up the media guide for this, huh? You couldn't just go to their athletic director website to get the phonetic pronunciation of any of this.
Nope, I had to watch it on silent. So this is everything I know. 45 unanswered points. What an incredible game.
And on a collision.
Also,
go ahead.
Great stuff from the defensive line. I mean, 2 sacks from, I think his name is pronounced John Daka. Incredible. one of the best performances that James Mattisson's ever put, 66 points. I am informed that that's a team record. As a lifelong fan, I of course already knew that. And I believe the 600 plus yards they got, 620 some yards, that was also a school record. So, they're getting hot at the right time. I don't believe in momentum unless it comes to my Dukes. James Mattison will be playing against an FCS powerhouse in Northern Iowa, but the experts say that the only team they have to worry about is North Dakota State, and they are starting a baby at quarterback. So, guaranteeing a Dukes, well, I mean, he's a freshman, right? Yeah. So he's a baby. And they're starting a baby at quarterback. So I am guaranteeing a James Mattison Duke national championship, their second one in, I want to say, 4 years, the true dynasty of the FCS. Incredible. Love my Dukes.
It's coming. They are on a collision course with NDSU. I can't wait for the preview of that episode. That will be tremendous. And we won't even be previewing whatever, Vikings playoff thing will be going on, or, it'll be Vikings Packers or something. Nope, we are here to talk about the Dukes versus the Bison. Woof.
Ben DiNucci? That's got to be how you pronounce that guy's name. That's the quarterback.
Lifelong fan of the James Mattison Dukes, Arif Hassan, James Madison's adopted son.
I'm just so glad I put DiNucci in contact with James Mattison. What a great decision by me
that had
to point them in the right direction at quarterback.
In most situations, speaking as somebody who's been on a commencement committee, in most situations, the committee asks the person to go and give the commencement speech. You might as well just reach out. Be like, listen, James Mattison. And you'll get your college degree this way too. I think you can put that on. I think you can charge more for it now. Ever since I started supporting the Dukes at birth, they've been around. My first college debate team loss. My first college debate loss was to James Mattison. That's actually true. I like how there's one nugget of truth in all of this.
We got destroyed. Since the beginning of November, the Dukes have crushed opponents 223 to 64. The fact that they allowed 64 points, great shame to that very proud defense. I think as an outside observer, I can say nothing to be ashamed of, boys. You'll bring it home.
All right. Enough about the James Mattison Dukes. Let's go to the mailbag, and Brian Jellerson opens it up with, is there still merit to our wins against, quote, teams with winning records this season, now that many of those teams no longer have winning records? This might be my favorite question of the month.
The universe has balanced itself. Every time the Vikings beat a team, they cannot finish the season with a winning record. It's law. Well, I guess every time Kirk Cousins beats a team. So, that's too bad. The Vikings can't beat good teams anymore. For a while, it seemed like they could because they beat some teams who at the time were good, but history has revealed they are not, in fact, good. Rough.
It's just a situation where Kirk Cousins is Thanos, and he just goes to the team with the winning record, snaps, and now all of a sudden they're 8-8.
It's incredible because Thanos had a particular affinity for 500, didn't he?
He did.
Kirk Thanos. That's rough. Yeah, and like just like the Lions, except the Cowboys are competitive. Just like the Lions, and the Chargers, extraordinarily talented team, just being held back by coaching. I can't believe the Cowboys screwed this up so royally.
It's so
and they
bad.
Still make the playoffs.
And right now it is 17-10. The Giants leading the Eagles, and the Eagles are attempting to drive.
East. Wow.
Yeah,
the America's Conference.
This is just a gigantic garbage fire of a division. Oh,
is that
look.
Greg Ward? That can't be Greg Ward.
Aye, there's 13-14 yards right there. Kenneth Allen asks, do you think Cook played any worse than he usually does, or was the only noticeable effect of his injury the amount of snaps he received?
I think the only noticeable effect was the amount of snaps he received. I don't think he played any worse. And, my concern was was that there was a slight chance of that just because you have to change your style of doing everything. And if you're thinking about that, you're not thinking about, or you're thinking at all, and you probably shouldn't be. You're not playing as instinctive as you typically would. And so there's like maybe the possibility of like kind of compound, change your running style. You might play worse. It didn't seem like that. It seemed like it played well. Obviously didn't put the ball on the ground, so that's good too. But yeah, I think the only noticeable effect was they pulled him out. Still got 20 touches.
Yeah, there was some reporting, and I can't remember if it was radio or if it was from watching the TV broadcast, that Cook was watching how people fall, and I can't remember if it was like martial artists or if he was watching like action stars, like how they fall in order to like figure out how to not hurt himself.
That's super interesting. I had a discussion right after the game on the Athletic podcast with Chad Graff about how martial artists do train to learn how. So it's interesting that that's something that he paid attention to. It's one of the first things they teach you in judo. I did a bit of judo, and like before you learn anything else, they're just like, yeah, we gotta teach you how to fall. And it's kind of easy to figure it out, but the problem is to make it instinctive takes like a while. It's not something that you can just pick up necessarily in a day to do instinctively as you're falling. It has probably, I'm not going to say saved my life, but probably saved my head from a concussion a couple of times learning how to fall. I can't imagine that's the same thing as the thing that he needs to learn how to do, which in judo, it's typically a one-on-one matchup, and you already know the angle of attack, and you know mid-air kind of what's going to happen for the rest of the fall. You're just going to fall. In a football game, there's all kinds of potential for collisions to occur mid-collision, right? Like, there's all kinds of things that can prevent you from falling the way you want. So I don't know how you can control that in any meaningful way. But also, most of the time with judo, at least, and probably other martial arts, learning how to fall is about protecting your head. And spreading out the impact, over a wider surface area so that, those are the two things. And I don't think either of those really apply to Cook's situation, where he just kind of needs to avoid contact to that clavicle area. Like, I suppose, spreading out the surface area as he falls would be important. The issue there is, at least in judo, I don't know how it works in other martial arts, you slap the floor with your arm at the same time the rest of you falls to spread out that impact. And that is absolutely not a thing you can do in football if you're the ball carrier. So I'm not really sure how this works for him. But more power to him, so long as he doesn't fumble.
Yeah, that's our main concern at this point. Also from Kenneth Allen, has Conklin been receiving significantly more targets lately? If so, what explains this? More tight end targets generally, more targets to under targeted players like Conklin and Treadwell, or something else?
So he did not receive any targets for the first 8 weeks of the season. So he has received a lot more targets recently. 2 or 3 for the past couple of games, and 1 I think in week 10 or something like that. So yeah, he has received more targets recently. He hasn't played substantially more snaps. He has played more snaps recently, not substantially more snaps, but those snaps tend to occur in the passing game now, as before his snaps were primarily in the running game. So he's running more routes now than he did before. That's part of it. But I think the biggest part of it is Adam Thielen's injury. They've been throwing to tight ends a lot more just because, they've been playing in 2 receiver sets personnel a lot less. Either that's 12 or 21 personnel. They've been playing in 2 receiver sets a lot less. And so, they've just put more tight ends on the field. They've been playing a lot of 3 tight end as well. And so that just puts him on the field, and he's on the field more. He's going to get open. He's, not necessarily a check down, but he's not the primary read. And so when you go through the progression, he's there. That's part of it. He played really well in camp, much better than I expected. I didn't really love how he played, as a rookie in camp. So, it was really good to see him play, like that in training camp. But, it's kind of translating now. He's a pretty good backup tight end. So I think a lot of that is just opportunity. I think with Adam Thielen out, and knowing that he can play as well as he does, they just kind of shifted to a play style that put more tight ends on the field because they were comfortable with their level of tight end play. Now that Treadwell is turning into a very reasonable kind of wide receiver 4, now forced into a wide receiver 3 role because of the Thielen injury, I think we may see more targets for Treadwell and fewer targets for. That was a really impressive Wentz play until it turned into an almost interception. Fantastic.
I was just about to say the same thing.
Yeah. Just a really tremendous interception he almost threw there. But yeah, we might see those targets shift back to Treadwell just because now he's demonstrated that he's somebody that can actually, produce for the offense in a way that they were definitely not going to be comfortable with before.
Yeah. Carl asks, will the Viking season end with A, Kai Forbath field goal, B, a loss to the nothing to play for Bears, C, a brilliant finish to 11-5, and elimination by the best net touchdowns tiebreaker?
Okay, that last one sounds amazing, but I think the odds of that are so incredibly low. I think the Vikings have to lose out and the Rams have to win out or something like that. And even then, the Rams get the conference tiebreaker, so conference wins tiebreaker. Yeah. So you can't even do that. So I don't think there's a way to get down to that tiebreaker, although it would just be so tremendously Vikings to get to that point. I think really the season, I think they make the playoffs, and then everyone talks about how, hey, they beat the Cowboys don't know how to finish, the Cowboys are not that great. They're like 8-8 and they win the division or something like that, which watching this game seems very possible. Yeah, 8-8 win the division, and they beat the brakes off the Vikings. That seems very Vikings to me too.
Yeah. Lane Walton asks, according to Treadwell's PFF ranking, he's the best wide receiver on the team. When do we classify him as the number one wide receiver?
Got to do it now.
Strike while the iron's hot. Can we talk extension yet? I feel like we should be talking extension.
We think 4 for 40. 4 for
no, I
50?
think we have to look.
You take a $50 million contract? I don't know.
I don't get out of bed for less than 50 if I'm him. I really think that we're looking at the mythical Dak Prescott contract that was floating around Twitter today. That was like
the $40 million a year.
Yeah, $40 million for 10 years. My favorite comment on that was, wait, I'm sorry. Does he play right field now? Like,
yeah, it was left field. Yeah. I saw that. He's playing left field now. That was great. I loved it.
Like, that is clearly a baseball one. We'll touch on more about the Chargers stuff next episode, but from James, the question is, are we more concerned about the Chargers after their dominant performance over the Jags, or were they just beating up on a bad team?
They were beating up on a bad team that took too long to play the better quarterback.
There is the meme out there that the whole, like, what's something you can say about sex that you can say about Blough? And the best one I saw that was the question, what can you say about this beatdown that the Jets or that the Jags were experiencing? What can you say about this beatdown that you can also say about sex? I think that the best one was something along the lines of, I really thought the mustache would spice things up.
That's good. I would have gone with put in Gardner, but that's I like that.
I had to reply with the slow clap. Like that.
That's so good.
Yeah, that's so good. That's pretty good. Yeah, the Jags are trash, and they took too long to figure out that Foles wasn't going to be their choice, and they stumbled upon something that people seem to be interested in. So if it sells more tickets at this point, I think Foles is going to go back to being a very well-paid backup. He almost had a starting job. So close.
So close. If they had never played him, they could have traded him, but now. Yeah, he's played terribly. He's lost his trade value for that contract. They're like, hey, yeah, you got to ride the hot hand. Nothing wrong with Foles. He's proven that he can perform on several teams. It sucks to trade him for 8 first-round picks. I hate to do it. No, I'll say again, the Chargers are a very talented team and they're very risky. They've taken some very bad teams to one-score games and some very good teams to one-score games. And I think, because one-score games tend to be a product of luck, I think with the Cowboys, the problem there is not luck, but coaching. But with the Chargers, they're just a tremendously unlucky team. I would not argue that the Vikings can count on another team's bad luck. So they're more talented than the record. But Phillip Rivers is just not playing all that well. I am a little concerned about the game, but not, incredibly concerned.
Yeah. Joe Justice asks, a relatively prominent football blog compares the Cousins signing to the Ravens signing Elvis Grbac. On a scale of Trubisky can throw left to Wentz is good, how wrong is that take?
Didn't they sign Gerbeck to get rid of Dilfer?
I'm pretty confident, yes.
So, it's pretty wrong. Like, the Dilfer comparison for Keenum, I get where it goes. They play two completely different styles of football, but I get where it goes.
I think they just wanted an excuse to include an awesome name like Elvis Gerbeck.
Yeah, that's a great name. But yeah, I mean,
how do you miss that?
I don't think Gerbeck was ever you can always argue that, Cousins is really good, right? Because the base level statistics, especially like passer rating, he's got incredibly, good years statistically. So you can always argue that I don't know that you ever had an argument that Gerbeck was great. So can't say that.
Well, the Eagles just missed a field goal.
Oh, right after they signed Jake Elliott. Man, missed 0 kicks, signs a contract, misses 2 kicks. Wow. Man, it sucks to be a fan of a team that has kicker concerns. I have no idea what that would be like.
Raul asks, was the extension of Xavier Rhodes an incorrect move? If so, were there warning signs? Example, the slow start to his career.
I wouldn't say that there were warning signs. I think it was the right move. And sometimes you get pretty unlucky. The problem is, and this goes back to the PFF study talking about why coverage is king and why cornerbacks are really high value, is that the reason it can seem that, you'd want to pay pass rushers, that pass rushers tend to be stable in their production. A good pass rusher that produces 1 year will almost certainly produce the next year, relative to, football players. I mean, they just tend to be stable. Whereas cornerbacks are not stable. Even after you take that into account, how a cornerback does in year 1 is more predictive of how a team will do in year 2 than how a pass rusher does in year 1. So even though the pass rusher is more likely to repeat his performance, coverage is so important, especially at the cornerback position. It's so important that even with that instability, it is just better. And so I don't think that there were warning signs at the time that they signed to the contract. I don't think that there were that many injury concerns. Not to say he was the picture of health or anything like that, but nothing that you would say, this guy's made of glass or anything. So, I don't think he was playing poorly. I thought he had actually overcome his biggest issues, which were shifty receivers. You just get burned sometimes. Like sometimes cornerbacks don't have the ability to kind of repeat their high level performances. So, it was good signing, bad results. It's like going for it on 4th and 2 at their 40. Yeah, you should do it. It doesn't guarantee anything.
No.
But it's better more often than not to do it.
And when you have the leading rusher in the NFL, you should probably not hand off to your fullback at that moment, but what the hell do I know? Mixing metaphors. Dusty asks, when was the last time you saw a brown cat?
Atari. My previous cat, Rip.
My parents, I believe, they have a gray cat, and I believe they have a brown cat. Yes, they do have a brown cat, now that I'm thinking about it. I'm deathly allergic to cats, and my parents have a female and a male, and those who are allergic to cats know that the male is actually the one you're much more allergic to. So when my mom proceeded to get another cat and got a male one, my dad just looked at her and went, "Do you want James to just never come by? Is that what you're doing? Like, are you trying to send him a sign that we don't want him to bring the grandkids by? Like, what the hell?"
That's great.
So much rage. Let's go to Chris, and the question is, which Vikings player has the team record for most hurdles over a player in a single season? I think we're starting to reach the level of Mattison taking this title.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the name of that tight end. It's not Dugan. Who's that tight end? This is so bad for me. I should know this.
This is bad for your brand, not knowing it off the top of your head.
Yeah, he's like famous for knowing it. It's Jermaine Wiggins, right?
Feel like that's a basketball player. In fact, I'm fairly certain.
No, it's Jermaine Wiggins. I'm going to go. I don't know what the number of hurdles he has is. Maybe it's only one. But I'm going to say he has the record. And also that Mattison has not beaten it.
Aw. I swear.
We'll figure it out arbitrarily when it happens.
Yeah. It's like, I swear Jermaine Wiggins was a basketball player. What the hell am I thinking of? All right, never mind then.
Andrew Wiggins?
Yeah, probably. Might as well be. Oh my god, what the hell was that?
Someone just called it a gnat flicker. We gotta do more shows while watching
terrible Monday Night Football games. This was like a he did the two-handed
It's
pass.
a lot of work for negative half a yard.
He did a two-handed like basketball pass.
So good, man.
That you see like 6-year-olds
Yeah,
do.
I mean, you'd expect Jermaine Wiggins to do that.
Wow. Temporarily Arif's cat, which really is just a fantastic name. And it's
so funny, man.
It's so good. Would you rather fight 25 Arifs the size of Arif's beard or one Arif's beard the size of Arif? This question is for both James and Arif.
Definitely the one, because my beard is a substantial portion of my mass. So,
agreed.
Yeah, that would be more than 25 times me. So I'd rather just fight one. Plus, I mean, a beard. What's it gonna do?
Well, I mean,
what are you gonna do? Stab me?
Well, I mean, depending on the situation and my access to fire, I always carry a lighter on me, so I feel like
so you gotta fight. You gotta fight the one beard.
Yeah,
easy.
Yeah, makes sense. Don from Ohio asks, do you see the rotating cornerback play happening more and more for the rest of the season / playoffs?
I don't know if we'll see it in the playoffs, but I do expect to see it more through the end of the season, and then I think we'll kind of make a decision about whether or not that's the best way to go about things by the time the playoffs occur. And maybe it'll continue into the playoffs, but I think it is somewhat of an experimental play that happens to be working, which is nice, to kind of get their feet under them from a coverage perspective. I also imagine it makes prepping for the Vikings very difficult, so that's kind of a nice net benefit to it. But I wouldn't expect it for the playoffs. I wouldn't be surprised to see it, though.
Next question, as Carson Wentz is tossed to the ground.
Yeah, that was rough.
What is the worst Christmas party you ever went to?
Man. I've been to a Christmas party where I didn't know anybody there, and it was an ugly sweater party, and I didn't have an ugly sweater. So, like, I did nothing for the first hour of the party, didn't really talk to anybody. It sucked. And then at some point, some, like, and I was like, I was just out of college. Some high schooler comes up and just starts talking to me. I think she just felt bad. And
you were doing the lonely looking guy thing from Flight of the Conchords season 1. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, this is getting pathetic. And so I just kind of left, but like that had to be the worst one. I brought some food, didn't even take the container back with me. I was like, I gotta be out.
Yeah. I, as somebody who DJ'd for 17 years, I did.
You've probably been to a bunch of bad parties.
I have seen many things. Not many as ugly as that Carson Wentz pass, but the
brutal.
that was bad. Although I did DJ a Christmas party that I was trying to figure out why everyone was so down and nobody was. Yeah, because Christmas parties tend to be a bit of a crapshoot. People usually get about 2-ish hours to dance if they want to dance, and a lot of the time nobody really wants to, or it's kind of an uphill battle in order to get the crowd to do it. And I was trying to figure out why nobody danced the entire 2.5 hours, and I was actually working hard. This wasn't like James just trying to get a check and okay, well, whatever, they're not going to do it. Like I was actively like trying and what was going on. It turns out that he had just fired half the office the day before. And
holy crap.
the people that and like I was wondering, like, there's a lot of empty like seats here. Like this is usually Christmas party, and it was at a really nice place. It was at on Lake Street in St. Paul. There's a golf course right on the St. Paul side of the bridge. So it's this gorgeous place. The sun's going down. It's beautiful looking out. And nobody is dancing. Nobody wants to do a damn thing. It's like, why is, and I finally talked to somebody as I'm tearing down. Oh yeah, they fired half the staff. The business is clearly going under. This is much.
That's way worse because that's like awkward for everybody.
Yeah.
I was just personally like it was my social skills were the problem, so I can just blame me. So that's not nearly as bad as what you're talking about, where you can't overcome that.
No, and you know what? Some DJs would be able to overcome that situation. I was not one of those DJs on that night. I tried. I failed. Also, and finally, from Don from Ohio. After being utterly humiliated and shunned by family and friends for losing his vet to Arif, I assume Avatar, but whatever. But losing his vet to Arif, sure. At Dog Eddie Crane, drugs and kidnaps Arif and James. When Arif wakes up, he notices he's wearing a Carson Wentz NDSU jersey and a note attached to it. The note states he must wear this jersey at all times, no matter what, or a tiny device implanted in James's brain will go off, which has enough force to either kill him or make him a vegetable, or worse, a Packers fan who bought thousands of dollars of Packers stock. If Arif tells anyone, the device goes off. If Arif tries to at any time to take the device off, it goes off as well. If anyone asks Arif why he's wearing it, he must say, "I love Carson Wentz," or the device goes off. My question to Arif is this. I really wanted it to be like football related at the end of this, or like not have anything to do with the opening, but here we are. How many minutes does it take for Arif to say F it and remove the jersey? And what three possible outcomes would Arif hope for James when the device goes off in his brain?
So, when? The beautiful thing about this hypothetical is that there were tons of efforts to remove loopholes, but he forgot. I'll just wear stuff over it. I don't think that was covered, so I'm just going to do that. Wear stuff over that jersey.
Is this where we use the Patreon to like get the device out of my head? Can we write this?
We can't
off?
tell anyone about it, otherwise the device goes off. We can't use the Patreon.
Well, what if I say something about it? Is that included in anything? I don't think.
That's not. That's a good point.
Yeah, I'm going to Mayo. I'm taking the Patreon with me.
You need it. You mean, Don, you needed a lawyer to look over this one. Yeah. So many loopholes. Better luck next time.
Frankly, I'm not as impressed.
No, but if the device goes off, he has to be a Packers fan, so I can make fun of him for having thousands of dollars of Packers stock. Which is interesting because he'll gain thousands of dollars worth of assets that are the least liquid assets on the planet because they're non-tradable. You can only pass them down. Like you can't sell them. You can't do anything with them.
I knew a really nice guy at work that had Packers stock, and he brought it in one day, and I just felt so bad. I was like, you feel about as bad as those people who bought like the name of a star, or I own 6 feet of dirt on Mars or something. Like, dude, that's
it's actually a perfect comparison. I own 6 feet of dirt on Mars. Like that's precisely what that is.
Aw. All right, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Arif, what do you have to plug?
Busy week. I've got a mailbag coming up for The Athletic, and then after that, I've got a piece of The Athletic talking about a bunch of defensive changes that I've noticed over the past 2 weeks. I'm going to have to double check with the Lions coaches film, which it's still not out yet, so we'll see if that piece comes out in time. And then obviously there's going to be a preview of the Chargers game. So all of that's coming up this week, hopefully.
All right, sounds good. Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code, and if you're still watching along with the Eagles game, it is approximately 3:38 left in the fourth, and an actual connection. How about that? By Carson
Eagles
Wentz.
Are driving, man. Hey, overtime is on the table. That's free football, James. How could you complain?
We should almost continue taping after this. After the show, and be like, just watch the end of this and just like edit in our cackling laughter into the end of the episode. Is that Ertz?
It's Goddard. He finally showed up.
Oh, geez, yeah. Ugh.
Look at that.
All right.
Fine, South Dakota State.
He's not as good as your Dukes, though. If he was on your Dukes, then he'd be a winner. And then he'd probably not be playing for a team as bad.
Lifelong fans in order.
Is he gonna?
My
oh
Dukes,
my God!
My Gophs, my Jackrabbits.
That's terrible. All right. Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Thank you again for listening. If you enjoy the show and hear value in what we produce, you can go ahead and go to patreon.com/NorseCode or go to paypal.me/NorseCode and donate to the show. Help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, help keep the show ad free, and help keep the lights on for future episodes. So for Arif, my name is James, and please remember that revenge is a dish best served funky as hell. And there's no way he's going to get in here, is it? Oh.
That would be so funny.
Tackled. Good. All right. So that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you later in this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.